I'm Folasade Pyne, the host of Unscripted Conversations, a new, exciting, revolutionary experience for our people to have complex conversations about issues directly affecting our community.
Hello, I'm Folasade Pyne, the host of Unscripted Conversations, and today we're here for a conversation about the political perspectives of Black men by listening to what's important to them and to reach a common ground about what we can do together, regardless of our political perspectives, to work in the best interest of Black people. So today we're going to hear from some powerful Black men, but before we get started, we're going to play a video about how we got here.
Really interesting about what's happening in America right now is that a lot of people don't seem to realize how dominoes connect, how one piece knocks another piece that knocks another piece, and in the end creates a giant wave. Each story seems completely unrelated, and yet at the same time, I feel like everything that happens in the world connects to something else in some way, shape, or form.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States.
It has been an honor and a privilege to work side by side with you to strengthen our democracy. And with that, I just have two more words to say. Obama out.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
Who's number one with Hispanics? Trump.
Yes, you told us
Trump.
that.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. We will do everything in our power to keep the infection and those carrying the infection from entering our country.
Tonight, President Trump is drawing fire for his comments about the rising death toll from coronavirus. With more than 1,000 Americans dying every day, the president said it is what it is.
Of times this morning, Carolyn, this transport truck going through. Tell me more about it and sort of the aftermath to this.
And I think this news cycle that we witnessed in the last week was a perfect example of that. Amy Cooper, George Floyd, and, the people of Minneapolis.
Emblematic of the tensions about race and policing. The name Breonna Taylor.
You tweeted, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. How would you know that phrase and not know its racially charged history?
Well, I've heard that phrase for a long time. I don't know where it came from.
Breaking news, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has made his choice. NBC News has confirmed that Biden has picked California Senator Kamala Harris to be his running mate, the first woman of color in history to be chosen for such a position.
As President Trump receives treatment for coronavirus, cases are increasing in 32 states and Puerto Rico.
The results are almost final, and it looks like America has tested negative for Donald Trump.
We did it. We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
That is because tonight Joe Biden officially became president-elect. And let's also be real clear here. It's over.
And we're back. I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. We have three incredible panelists here today. First, we have Drew, who is a digital content creator, a former college football player from North Carolina A&T State University. Aggie Pride. He's been producing YouTube videos since 2008, and since then, he has expanded his following across several major platforms with videos on topics ranging from dating and relationships to Black hair care and politics. Our next panelist is Kelvin. Kelvin is a U.S. Air Force veteran. He's a prior special duty marshal. He's an accomplished video producer and a social media influencer. He also describes himself as a pro-Trump patriot. And our next panelist is Taalib Saber. Taalib is a principal attorney at the Saber law firm, LLC. He's a Pan-African community organizer and activist. He's the managing director for the Movement for Black Power in DC and sits on the board of several organizations for Black Power. He's an international filmmaker and a double HBCU graduate with degrees from North Carolina Central University School of Law and Morgan State University. Thank you to all of our panelists for being here. So my first question for my panelists is, did you vote in this past election? What candidate did you support? And what was the most important factor in this election for you? And I want to start with Drew.
All right. Yes, man. Well, thank you for having me, Folasade. I feel so privileged to be here on this this particular platform. Yes, you know I voted. That ain't even no question. I voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Really, just because this is really one of the most, maybe actually the most important election of my lifetime, and maybe the most important election in the last, we'll say, 50, 60 years. The important factors for me in this election was really all the progress that we've made as a people since 1954. And I'm going all the way back to Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 68, Roe v. Wade, a woman's actual right to choose what happens with her own body, healthcare coverage for about 133 million people with pre-existing conditions, COVID-19. Was a very strong measure for me, and as well as police accountability. Can't forget that, and also just overall decency and what kind of country and what kind of image we want to project, and just overall level of competency and the ability to lead and be a legit superpower and a world leader. So I voted for, again, Biden Harris. I voted for intelligence, competence, and experience, and that's why I did it.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Drew. Let's hear from Taalib.
So thank you. And I give thanks for this platform and the brothers that are also here on this panel. So for me, I voted for the Green Party. A couple of factors that played into that were some of their platform and their issues that they are for that align with me, as it relates to the decriminalization of marijuana, the releasing of political prisoners, the support on reparations. Some of these things are tantamount to the work that I do in the community, not only as a lawyer, but also as an organizer. And we've organized in part with some members of the Green Party before. So I'm familiar with their work and the issues that they represent and what they want to do for the people living in these United States.
And Kelvin, let's hear from you. What was the most important factor for the way you voted in this election?
It's a tough question. I voted for Trump, and like I said earlier, for me, it's mainly a spiritual war. So a lot of stuff I see Trump standing up for are righteous things. Like I said earlier, pro-life being one of them, and yeah, that's pretty short and sweet to the point.
Okay, so pro-life was a big topic for you. That's very interesting as a man, that reproductive health was a big issue for you. And we're going to delve more into that, but I wanted to talk about the increase of Black men voting for Trump this election. It's a slight increase, but we did see an increase, and we also saw a lot of Black male celebrities, such as 50 Cent, Lil Wayne, Kanye West, and Ice Cube supporting Trump very vocally. And on the other hand, we did have Diddy, who was representing Democratic interests, but who believes that it's time for a Black political party. And so he launched that. What do you all think about these different political perspectives of Black men? Do you align with any of them? Feel free to jump in if anyone has a thought on that.
You know what? I'll actually go ahead and jump in on this one. It's interesting. Do I align with any of the celebrities? Nah. I think that especially living out here in LA, is giving me a different perspective on what a celebrity is. Honestly and truly, these are normal people with just really cool jobs. That's really all it is. A lot of them do not know much about the political spectrum, and that's fine. A lot of people in America don't know, but a lot of these celebrities also don't take the time to actually educate themselves or use the fame and clout and networking ability and contacts that they have to get in contact with people who are in power. To actually, literally, you can jump the line and get direct information. You don't even have to necessarily Google. You can get a representative on the phone. You can get a senator on the phone if you are 50 Cent, Ice Cube. But I will say, though, and I think Tiffany Cross made a point about this. I think Jamel Hill said something about it, too. It's interesting how men, celebrities who have never waded very deep, if at all, into political waters are so outspoken or were so outspoken in discouraging black people to vote or encouraging black folk to vote for Trump when a black woman showed up on the ticket. I thought that was just kind of a little bit more than coincidental. I think 50 Cent was just being 50 Cent. He's a dude from Southside Jamaica, Queens. You feel me? Like that's just NYC goofy dude behavior. You feel me? But I think Wayne drinks cough syrup as a beverage. So yeah, you know what I'm saying? Diddy is just being Diddy. You know what I mean? I remember, we were freshmen. Matter of fact, I was a freshman at A&T when we were talking about vote or die. You know what I'm saying? And so I remember that. But again, even with the vote or die campaign on the Democratic side, he wasn't getting specifically into policy and that sort of thing. So I thought Diddy made at least the most amount of sense saying we need a black, even though we already have a congressional black caucus, maybe I don't want to say civilian, but let's say citizen black caucus, if that makes a perfect sense, some sort of sense. I can certainly understand that. And I think that's a great way to bring different ideas to the table. So maybe he's the closest one. Ice Cube, on the other hand, this was a heartbreaker for me. The thing about Ice Cube was that he couldn't be bothered to speak with Kamala Harris, who is also from California. But he could fly across country to meet with Jared Kushner, who then went on and said, the black folk in the position that we are in right now because we don't want to do better. I honestly and truly, I really feel like Ice Cube's mission, not his personal mission, but I think his job was to help decrease black voter turnout. Not necessarily getting folk to, it was just, and he was able to do that, not just with his celebrity, but he was supposed to be able to do that by injecting what I call a pseudo woke talking agenda. And he brought up something called a contract with Black America, which sounded great. But when you actually look at the actual contract, as my girl Reese did, it didn't have anything for black women on there. Also, if you look at the actual details, the CBC looked at it and they were like, yo, half this stuff we already got in bill form on Mitch McConnell's desk. We've been doing the work, huh? You know what I'm saying? And so it's just Mitch McConnell hasn't brought it to the floor for a vote. Some of the other points don't even pass constitutional muster. And so that was really the most disappointing. As a matter of fact, Cambridge Analytica did a study how about back in 2016, 3.5 million black people were targeted by the Trump campaign, not to get them to turn out for Trump, but to stay your tail home. Don't worry about voting for me. I need you to stay home, stay away from the ballot box. Don't be involved. Stay woke. All right, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the system is lesser two evils. Stay home. That's what I want. And what that ended up happening, that delivered in places like Michigan, that delivered in places like Wisconsin, because he was able to, at least folk like that were able to get down. I'm talking about to the finest detail of these people's lives, income, occupation, where they're from and that sort of thing. And so I think that was what Cube's go around, or his mission was his go around. I think that what they underestimated was the work from people, like Live with the K-Hive, like myself, putting other digital information out there to combat that in a manner that, honestly, misinformation had a hard time dealing with. Russian bots and Mississippi memes couldn't really deal with as well. So that's my opinion on that right there. So
very interesting, and good points about that Cambridge Analytica that specifically targeted Black people, and yet the effects are still they're still harming Black people to this day. Taalib or Kelvin, did either of you all feel inspired or aligned with any of the Black celebrities who made stances this election?
You want to go ahead, Taalib? How you say it, Taalib?
Taalib, yeah, it's cool. I'll chime in on it. So I operate from a space that no celebrity speaks for the masses of Black people. Like you said before, we're not a monolith. So as diverse as this panel is, it is exemplary of the diversification of the United States as it relates to African people here. But you can't they represent the petty bourgeois class. They represent those that are the vanguards for the system and how it works. So whatever side they fall on, they don't represent the regular people, the everyday, your average day-to-day person who is struggling to make ends meet, whose children are out in the street, you know, doing things that they don't want to do, but they feel as though they have to do in order to survive. So no, they don't speak for me at all. As it relates to the declining of black men voting, I think that what happens is when you're in a system for so long and you see the system produce so say you have, as Malcolm X would say, you would have a chicken, and a chicken does not produce a duck egg, and you expecting a chicken to produce a duck egg is asinine. It's also insane. What happens is when you see something over and over and over again happen, you get disenchanted. You can't blame people for that. I'm a mentor, so I see youth all the time that I work with have that same hopelessness. Here in the DC metro area, I do work in Baltimore as well, and especially in Baltimore, you see it, where you go and you canvas the community and you ask them certain questions or particular questions about what they need. What is it that the community needs? What is it that, you know, we're lacking to make sure that we can survive, and we can not just survive but thrive? And a lot of it is some basic stuff that doesn't meet their needs on the daily. So you can't blame them for getting disenchanted with it, nor can you shame them, because the United States is made up of 337 million people, I believe. So if we are 14 million of that, we know that majority of the votes out there come from essentially white folks, you know, white Americans. And then you have certain aspects that we can swing. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, you're asking us to vote. You're asking us to come out in these mass numbers to vote. But what have you done for us on the day to day? And we understand, or us on the panel, we should know that the federal level is clearly different than the local level. So your local politics are the ones that really control the things. And for the federal level, for the most part, the impact is on foreign policy and the federal stuff. But, you know, you are in an environment like that, and you've been reared in that. Sometimes you just throw your hands up with them. You know what? We've tried this for years. Let's try it this way.
Very interesting. Okay. And Kelvin, as a Trump supporter, the one Trump supporter on this panel, what do you think about other Black men who are embracing, you know, your chosen candidate?
Well, you know, the mainstream media has been demonizing Trump and you know, making him seem like he's something that he's not for like the past 4 years since he stepped up to run for presidency. So you know, it's kind of like, you know, being a Trump supporter is like coming out the closet gay, you know, what, 20, 30 years ago. So I think for a mainstream celebrity to come out as a, you know, a black rapper or something like that, to come out to saying they support Trump in some kind of way, I think it's bold. Takes a lot, you know what I'm saying? I think as far as like with Lil Wayne, two of my favorite rappers is Kanye and Wayne. And I think with Lil Wayne, you know, he mentioned when he was 11 years old, and I think he was down on the ground. He got shot or something happened. I think he was shot, and then the cops ran in, and you know, all the black cops kind of just ran in, you know, looking for other people or whatever, and jumped over him. And he said the only cop that stopped was the white cop. So he mentioned that, you know, since that period in time, he never had this ideology of like, you know, white people being bad or white people being good or any of that. He just saw, you know, he never had a problem with cops. So and I think in the black community, you know, a lot of people have been brainwashed and conditioned to you know, hate law enforcement on a mass scale. A lot of people have been brainwashed and conditioned to think that white cops are just out here murdering black people, you know, at a mass rate for no reason. And you know, I think that takes a whole effect on a lot of black people even wanting to support Trump, because for some reason people have been brainwashed to think Trump got something to do with police brutality in the first place. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
You know what, that brings up a really good point about Trump's relationship to police brutality. This is a president who, during the protests for racial justice this summer, who made rallying cries to white supremacists. He told them to stand back and stand by instead of denouncing white supremacy.
That's
These are
not true.
people. It's not true that he said that statement. Is that what you're saying?
Are you referring to the Proud Boys?
Yes. When during the Democratic debate, excuse me, not the Democratic debate, the presidential debate, he was asked to denounce white supremacy and to denounce the Proud Boys. And
Sorry to cut you off, but when he was asked to denounce white supremacy, his first immediate response to that was sure, which is acknowledging that he does denounce white supremacy, which he's also done a numerous amount of times over the past 4 years since he first started running for presidency. But the mainstream media refuses to acknowledge him denouncing white supremacy. He's also denounced David Duke. He's denounced the KKK. He's denounced all groups of evil in general. And he's made that clear in multiple interviews. But for some reason, the mainstream media, such as CNN, MSNBC, and all these other mainstream medias that's out here, they refuse to report on that. So like you said with the debate, when you brought up the Proud Boys isn't even a white supremacy group, but the mainstream media has brainwashed people to think that the Proud Boys is a white supremacy group. So when Trump responded to it, for one, he said he's not even aware of the Proud Boys, which I'm sure he is. 9 times out of 10, Trump probably is aware of the Proud Boys before that debate took place. But who knows? Maybe he wasn't thinking about it at the time, or maybe he just didn't want to speak on it directly at the time. But to say that they're a white supremacy group when that's not even true is wrong. In fact, the leader of the Proud Boys is Hispanic. There's multiple black people in the Proud Boys.
right, and black people, Hispanic people, and white people can all be agents of white supremacy. They can all act in the interests of white supremacy. Donald Trump specifically said when the looting starts, the shooting starts, in response to black people and people of all races protesting against police brutality. So that is, let's say, God forbid,
That's a fact.
anyone you know is shot by police and people are protesting against the lack of regard for their life. Donald Trump is intentionally endangering their lives for protesting for justice. As a black man, how do you reconcile with that? Do you have family members who have experiences with brutality, and are you comfortable with your president telling the National Guard and other agencies that they can shoot protesters?
You're referring to law enforcement agencies shooting people who are being dangerous, like people who are committing violent acts or something, or
who are protesting, because during the racial justice protests, there was not violence. There was destruction of property, which is not the same as violence.
So you're saying Trump? You're saying that Trump authorized law enforcement agencies to shoot innocent protesters?
Those were his words. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. And as the commander in chief, he has the authority to command the National Guard
to you're saying when the shooting starts, you're referring to the law enforcement as shooting.
Yes, when the looting starts. So he was saying in response to the protesters, if anything goes wrong with the protesters, he is giving the green light for law enforcement to shoot protesters who are protesting.
Okay, so I would have to see that speech with him saying that in that context, because when I took that in as when the looting starts, the shooting starts, I was thinking of as far as when people are going out looting, they're also going out murdering people and shooting. That's what I was thinking of. So if you're referring to him saying the law enforcement shooting, I would have to see him in that speech in context.
Okay. Drew, I feel like you have a response to that. What are your thoughts?
So I have a few responses to that, especially as it pertains to law enforcement. One of the things about it is the right, and you've made a couple points that I just wanted to push back on, is that the right has this idea, especially the far right has this idea that they have the monopoly on God, number one, and law enforcement, number two. I'm a former college football player. Some of my teammates are in law enforcement right now. And so as a black man, and especially even some of my friends and family and such. So as a black man coming from that circle, of somebody who has a nuanced view of law enforcement, I can certainly look at certain things and say, okay, this is messed up. This is completely wrong. As far as Trump goes, his quote unquote support of law enforcement is superficial at best. This is a man who demonizes the FBI whenever they look into something that he does wrong. Anytime he's held accountable for breaking the law, he has an attack for those who are in law enforcement, particularly prosecutors. Doesn't do very well with prosecutors, even though they're not necessarily police, but they do bring law. The other thing about it is that yes, he openly did. Matter of fact, I remember when he was in the campaign or whatever, he was meeting with a bunch of. It was a rally with a bunch of different police heads, police chiefs, and such. And he was saying, "Oh yeah, when you put him in the car, yeah, don't put the head, take the hand away. You don't have to go ahead and rough him up." This is the same guy who's sending federal police officers into cities where people were protesting and threatening folks with violence, with state-sanctioned violence of police for folk who are exercising their First Amendment rights. As far as police officers, shooting people who are committing quote unquote violent acts, destruction of property is a level of violence, but it's not necessarily what I call a violent act to where it would somehow make it appropriate for police to start shooting people. That's a different thing. But there's a whole bunch of different tactics that are involved with it. Again, as a black man looking at police from a nuanced perspective, also knowing the history of policing in this country, how if we go back to the origins, this goes back to the slave patrols. Okay, and a lot of departments, especially in the South, evolved from those slave patrols into a lot of police departments that you see, especially across what was formerly known as the Jim Crow South. So you understand that, and especially as and even policing systemically in this country has been historically and systemically anti-black. We understand that they're used to enforce laws and then also disproportionately enforce laws that are against black folk. With that being the case, I also am able to recognize the work of people who go into these police departments to make changes. I'm going to shout out my girl Val Demings right here, right now, who's wonderful, who's a former police chief of Orlando, Florida, and some other folks as well who go into these particular systems. And people say that you cannot make a change. A system can be corrupted. Any system can be corrupted. Corruption does not mean necessarily evil. Corruption just means you are taking what the original intent was and altering it. So anything that you introduce into a system that was not meant for the original intent can corrupt that system. So yes, a evil system or something that's anti-black can be corrupted. But I want to mention another thing that that we mentioned, or that was mentioned earlier, rather. Donald Trump is somebody who looks at police as his foot soldiers to exact his will. It's not someone who he does not enjoy what an actual conservative does, where they enjoy the safety of what you call security of, at least the perceived security of policing in their mind. Donald Trump sees these people, at least in his position now as president, for the limited 70 days we got left, 60 some days left, as foot soldiers for his whim. Oh, you already done. It's over. It's over. So it's just a matter of understanding what he's doing. He's a con man. He plays to the crowd. This is showmanship. He's a master showman. He's not very good at many other things, but he is a master showman. And really all he does is he puts these tropes out into public to, number one, encourage. Yes, he does openly encourage brutality against folk. Through policy, he encourages brutality. When his first act of when he became president, he had Jeff Sessions appointed as his attorney general. They rolled back those Obama era restraints on police, where you had consent decrees, pattern and practices investigations. They threw those things out. They remilitarized police departments that the Obama administration had demilitarized. And so when I look at Donald Trump with a he's a man. We have to recognize he's a man who's completely ignorant of the experiences of black people in terms of being able to empathize and understand what marginalized people go through, at least at the hands of law enforcement. So I just want to throw that out there.
Any thoughts on that?
I was going to speak on the aspect of the institution of policing and the origins of it with the slave patrols and how they were commissioned to protect property, right? And that relationship really hasn't changed. I think the issue as it relates to the police is that of the institution, and the institutional issues with it. Yes, you have individual officers who may be assisting in some way. And one of the things I love to do when I'm on panels is to refer books. So there's a good book that the family should read called Breaking Rank by Norm Stanford. He talks about in that book how the training that goes along with being in the police force. And then now we know that if you think about it from a racist perspective, what is the best place to be where you can effectuate your thoughts or ideologies to and of oppressed people and legally get away with it? That would be the police force. I also want to hone in on is the fact that I don't personally make a distinction between the North and the South, because I am, I guess technically it would be the upper North, but there's no, so long as you're below that Canadian border, you still South. So the only difference is it's not as overt. And that's the thing that's dangerous is when you know, I'd rather deal with the devil who I know as opposed to when I don't, because at least, you know what you're going to get with this particular person. Whereas you can have someone that acts friendly to you, but in all the while are creating policies or creating different draconian things that will hem you up, but while smiling in your face. So it's kind of like you're a boxer with one of your hands tied behind your back. Like you doing the best that you can, and you're thinking this person is helping you out, that's attempting to release the rope behind you, all the while they're just making it tighter. You see the corruption that happens within the system, not just the police, but the actual judicial system. You see what's going on with that. So once again, going back to my original point, you can see how people become disenchanted with the whole political process as it relates to the voting aspect, I'll say, because politics isn't just voting. Politics is your day-to-day, how you maneuver, how you live, what you choose to do, the schools that you go to, maybe the wife that you choose, the husband that you choose, all of that is political, so it's not just reduced to that particular aspect.
Thank you for that point. Taalib, you brought up a really good point about the devil A lot of people describe this election as the lesser of two evils. They didn't want to vote for Trump. They didn't want to vote for Biden. And a lot of Black people who didn't support Biden felt that his history of the crime bill of 1994 and also Kamala's history as a prosecutor, they found that those things were enough for them to not ever trust them again. And although Kamala is a Black woman, it's monumental that she's the first, not only Black woman, she's the first woman, the first immigrant vice president, and also HBCU graduate. It's an incredible display that she is, right? But when you dig deep into her history as a prosecutor, a lot of Black people feel like she did a lot of harm to our communities. And so being a strong supporter of Kamala, tell me, how do you reconcile with that reality and the continued harms of their past policies?
So I'll go ahead. I'm the one that she's talking about. But so I think the way to reconcile it is to actually know the truth about her record. When you look at Kamala Harris's policies and headline format of headlines that were maybe typed up anywhere between 2019, 2018 to now, maybe not till now, yeah, anywhere between that and that, maybe 2018, 2019, 2020. You will come to a conclusion that she was doing great harm to Black people. When you actually dig into her record, you find out that the actual opposite is true. For instance, there was a trope that was going around saying that Kamala Harris was locking up great amounts of Black men for marijuana. Well, when you actually look at the record, you actually find out that's actually completely incorrect. The actual opposite is true. As a matter of fact, when she was Attorney General, number one, Attorney Generals don't prosecute marijuana cases. But while she was Attorney General in the state of California, the numbers of incarcerations for marijuana plummeted, not just decreased, plummeted. Her first year while she was Attorney General, there were about 817 people that were incarcerated on marijuana charges statewide, in the state of 40 million people. By the last year, it was 137 that were incarcerated. Again, 40 million people total. But this thing, it was a complete straight shot down. And that was due to other factors as well, the decriminalization and certain policies put in place for marijuana. But then if you go back even to her district attorney days in San Francisco, this is a woman, Kamala Harris, who one of her first acts as district attorney was to create a civil rights division within the San Francisco district attorney's office. That was not there at the time. She also was able to, they were actually protesters that were actually incarcerated on charges or locked up on charges awaiting trial. She dismissed the charges and got rid of them, let them go, said, hey, you're free to move. As far as it goes to, we'll even speak just to marijuana because that just is the popular substance as far as when it comes to this discussion. Her policies as the San Francisco district attorney in her office was that nobody, absolutely nobody who is has a charge or who is has a conviction for any type of simple marijuana possession was allowed to see any jail time. No incarceration was allowed per her policy. It went so far as her prosecutors refusing to even include those charges on the docket. That's according to Nikki Solis, who is the public defender who fought against Kamala Harris in court plenty of times. So she had to come out and tell the truth. So they weren't even including these on the docket. They also routinely took more the higher or more serious marijuana charges, felony charges, and had those pleaded down to misdemeanors as well. This is routine for her office. The other thing about Kamala Harris's office, even when you go back to the press clippings back in those times, the early 2000s and in the mid 2000s and such, there wasn't a question of her being too hard and, oh, she's tough on crime, what she's doing to folk. The stance with the mantra that she had was she's soft on crime. And when you actually look at what was happening, even for folks who, what she was doing, she was about 5 or 10 steps short of abolition. I'm looking at what she was doing. I looked at one particular case the other day where she, I wasn't even aware of this, even with all the history I did do about her. There was a guy with an extensive, long record, drug sales, burglary, and such. He actually had pulled a robbery case. They ended up giving this brother 9 months. 9 months with a long record and doing that. And I was like, look, I'm all for, this changing the systemic, oppression of folk. But at the same time, like, geez, y'all is real. So that was the thing. But when you look at her actual record, Kamala Harris, when she was deputy district attorney, she opposed Proposition 21. They ended up passing anyway. That particular measure increased criminal penalties for crimes that were committed by youth and incorporated many youth offenders into the criminal adult system. She was against that. As deputy DA, she co-founded the coalition to end the exploitation of kids, to provide legal and health services to sexually exploited children, including teenage sex workers or prostitutes. When she was a member of the Board of Trustees in San Francisco, she created the first of its kind matches program, which pairs at-risk youth. At-risk is code word for us, but it pairs them with mentors to expose them to art and broaden their horizons. This is the same woman who created for even more serious drug sales. We're talking about crack sales and cocaine. I'm talking about at a time when you were facing 20 years, black folk facing 20 years for 2 grams of crack. She created something called Back on Track to help drug offenders re-enter society, and also provided vocational training, counseling, parenting services, credit repair as well. And really substantially reduced the recidivism rates for the participants of that particular program. So instead of them actually going to jail, they never got any prison time at all. Instead of that, they went to a workshop where they got all this training, and then were able to be, once they completed that, they had jobs guaranteed waiting for them. They had repaired credit. She went through her personal Rolodex, calling folk up saying, yo, I got somebody here. Can you give them a job? The recidivism rate, that when you look at the numbers, recidivism rate for people in that program went from 54% to 10%. So this is what this woman was doing. She established the first safe house in San Francisco to get for girls who wanted to escape the sex trade. This is a woman that changed underage women and men from being treated as prostitutes or being treated as criminals, rather, instead of and had them treated as victims instead. This is the same woman that helped found the Center of Youth Wellness, which works to improve and identify health of children exposed to childhood trauma. She particularly worked with a black woman named Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She's the first black surgeon general, or actually she's really the first surgeon general in California, but she also is a black woman. Her specialty is childhood trauma. So when you have black kids in neighborhoods that are, particularly violent, gunshots and such, and then you expect them to go to school and learn, Kamala Harris was saying that's ridiculous. How are they supposed to, when you're dealing with people getting bullets flying and such? So she worked with this other sister, and they were able to go ahead and identify those and find different ways to identify that. Kamala Harris, she created the Bureau of Children's Justice to streamline enforcement of laws that uphold children's rights and pursue policies that improve the lives of children. When she was Attorney General, she created the Division of Recidivism and Reduction and Reentry to reduce the number of repeat offenders. That actual particular institution, rather, they partnered with the Court of College. And this is really a program that they had created that was really designed to divert young offenders from future criminal behavior through cognitive behavioral intervention and exposure to higher education. So this is what the AKA from Howard was doing when she was in a position of power, unlike what Tulsi Gabbard was capping on stage about, which is completely false. Matter of fact, Kamala Harris created the first commission on peace officer standards and training, certified law enforcement training on both procedural justice and implicit bias. It's the first of its kind in the country. She ain't wait for nobody else to do it. She did it. You know what I'm saying? And so this is just some of the things that, what I like Biggie said, that's just the half of my warpath. Like that, we ain't even get to like everything that she has done. Her measures, her approach was completely revolutionary and against it. She's literally what she said she did. Went to a system, put policies in place. Yeah, she had to take some hits, and people said that she was soft on crime and such. You know, when it gets convenient as a black woman, when you get a little closer to power, all of a sudden the narrative changes really swiftly. It's quite interesting and amazing how that happens. But you know that this is how you reconcile. You actually dig deep and look at what was happening specifically. Even when it relates to truancy, they were saying that she was locking black mothers up. Wrong. Her policy in San Francisco didn't even allow for that. It was an administrator, school administrator, and officials working directly with parents to help them get their kids back in school. Then after that, the next thing that it escalated to, okay, well, we can get social workers and caseworkers if maybe people are having problems with housing, with employment and such. Getting at the root and structural causes. What is actually stopping these children, but primarily black kids, when you have elementary school kids who are missing 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 days of school. Clearly, there's some structural issues that need to be addressed, and we can go ahead and eliminate some of those pitfalls, especially as they historically affect folk like us, especially in the Bay Area that was fresh off of the crack epidemic. This is what Kamala Harris was doing, not locking folk up. Nobody went to jail in San Francisco. And even when that measure went into State Bill 1317, they introduced something called, well, number one, prior to Kamala Harris, we're going back to the 1970s when Kamala was about middle school age. And so California decided to get tough on truancy. So what they did was they criminalized and they said, well, we will take, we'll start combining the kids missing school with also contributing to the delinquency of minors. It's California Penal Code 272. Been on their books since really 1872, but they actually beefed up the enforcement of it in 1976 or 1977. Anyway, I know I'm saying a mouthful. I just want to get this out real quick. I'm gonna finish real quick. But this is what I found in my research, because I was looking at the headlines. I'm like, wait, it don't sound right. So when you look a little bit deeper into it, but prior to Kamala Harris, district attorneys were able to go in and say, you know what, we don't like what's happening. Your child is missing school and such. We can go ahead and have police officers show up at your door and arrest. As a matter of fact, there's a woman in Orange County, California, named Cherie Peoples. There was an article that came out in the Huffington Post attempting to tie Kamala Harris to her. That is not the case. As a matter of fact, Cherie Peoples was in Orange County, historically racist Orange County out here in California. They had an initiative that started back in 2008 called OC GRIP, Orange County Gang Reduction Intervention Partnership. Under that particular thing, it's still going on right now, as a matter of fact. District attorneys was able to come in there and circumvent, they were able to get past the school boards and such, and they were able to have police officers show up at your door, even if your child, like Ms. Peoples' child was chronically ill, dealing with sickle cell. And so what you saw her dealing with was literally a glimpse of what California was like prior to Kamala Harris. Cherie Peoples was facing a fine of a max fine of $2,500. She was facing probation. She was facing up to a year in jail. What Kamala Harris did for SB 1317, which actually passed state legislature and the state senate and got signed into law, it slashed the max fine. So in the most egregious and worst case scenario, parents just not caring. Let's just put that in perspective, because when you're doing measures, you got to think about the worst case scenario. They said the max was going to be 2,000 instead of 2,500. They eliminated probation, and they entered with Kamala Harris. She entered in something called deferred entry of judgment for adjudication. So basically, you have the ability to have administrators get involved with parents. This is on a state level now. This is on top of that, you had caseworkers that could get involved. There were drug rehabilitation that was also included, housing, childcare, all these assistance, transportation. After the appropriate programs were completed, the cases were dismissed and no charges were there. That's the full story of it. So the trick for it is to know the full history. Even with Joe Biden, I mean, you talk about the crime bill. Yes, the crime bill, without question, was detrimental to a generation of black folk. But you got to know the specifics of it, because number one, he didn't pass that bill by himself. He's one senator. Number two, he was against the 3 strikes clause that was put in there. He was like, no, I don't want that. He lost that fight. The other part was that it was supported by the CBC and black leaders back then, but also that bill included the Violence Against Women Act, assault weapons ban, pattern and practice investigations of police, drug courts, and community policing. So the way it actually went off the rails or fell into a system was that the state level, when that bill was implemented into those racist state level systems, that's what happened to a lot of our entire generation of black men. And so that's the issue that I have with systems. You can have the best intentions, but if you don't put safeguards, if you're not cognizant and aware of how this overall system can detrimentally hurt somebody, you can have the best intentions, put everything, you think you're doing everything right, like Joe Biden did to respond to outbreak violence, and then end up hurting people because you don't understand that a system is there to that has to be accounted for. So that's how I reconcile it. Look at the details. Sorry for being so long.
It's all right. Thank you for the specifics of it. Now, you talk a lot about Kamala. I think Joe Biden, there are people to this day whose lives are still impacted by the crime bill. And there are people today who are affected. Even though this was a generation ago, this is not Gen Z, their children, Gen Z, are affected by the lack of life opportunities they had. Some people will never, ever forgive Joe Biden for the harms that he did to their specific communities. So I want to pass it over to Taalib, because Taalib is coming from a perspective where neither of the major parties are his options. We know there's a segment of Black people who don't believe either party is capable of addressing racial justice, and some people who don't even participate in the political process. So as an activist who doesn't align with either of the major parties, how do you encourage people to vote, if at all? And how can Black people be a part of the political process without aligning with either of the leading parties?
First of all, there's a lot of political immaturity that is that permeates throughout the country just generally. For the most part, when you see these ads of either candidate, you know, normally, or even some Smith during a presidential debate, you can throw so many slurs out there and slander the other candidate, lie outright, and people will buy it, you know, because they do not do research. Going to school and getting a degree doesn't equate to education. In fact, you may be miseducated. So a lot of times, what needs to happen is political education. There needs to be political education for the people to understand exactly who they're voting for. Why is it that these particular candidates are representing these issues? And how does that relate to what you need to do to continue to hold them accountable for that? So how I see it is this: the system exists currently. We're not destroying it tomorrow. Right. This is a corrupt system. We know that it's on stolen land. Let's be clear. You're not going to get any justice on stolen land, right? And the institution is set up to benefit, and we can have a racist analysis or we can have a classist analysis, right? It's set up to benefit the 1% majority white males. Let's be clear about that. So when voting, you need to look at the representation or who is running that represents your issues the best. Now, strategically, these candidates, and we've seen this over the course of the history of the United States, these candidates will tell you to your face what they will do for you. And then when they get in office, somehow they'll forget their phones, they'll misplace their pens, they'll misplace the laptops and the desktops because they have amnesia as to what they promised you. So you can't get upset with the people for not voting. Let's just be clear about that. But I would say that you have to be politically educated with it, and use it to your advantage. If it's issues that you don't, it doesn't resonate with you. So, for instance, with these major two parties, right? They're capitalistic parties, so they get corporate sponsorship, and we know the corporate sponsorships. When you peel back the layers behind that, it's like essentially you're a puppet for them. You add some, you'll make promises to them, and what you're going to fulfill for them. They'll pay you, and they'll pay your campaign rather. And then next thing you know, when they get in office, no matter which side of the aisle they're on, like they are representing those interests. And then they may do some little things for like the masses of people and all this and that. You can have a clear case study of how we are or how we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50, 60, 100, 200. Like you can look at the trajectory of how we were starting off when we were kidnapped and brought here to now. Right. Now you have small gains, but I look at it like this. And Sade, you should know, there clearly were queens that were ruling on the continent prior to colonization, right? It's nothing new that a woman is in power. Let's be clear about that. For our people, that's not new. So, but it's new for people who have been erased. Their memory has been erased of history. So now it appears as though these things are great because we haven't seen it in so long. But when you actually have a knowledge of self, you understand exactly, that this isn't new. Now, with that being said, though, the looking at the major parties and how it plays, one of my biggest issues outside of like the youth is the foreign policies that tie these two parties together. Because no matter who you have in that office, you still have imperialism. Yeah. You still have the aspect of going into other territories, creating havoc. Let's talk about the blockades and the sanctions on Zimbabwe and Venezuela, right? Let's talk about how you can easily block access to these countries or for them to have certain resources. So you create these issues, and then you start pointing at them and say, oh, look, they're going through human rights injustices. Who created the conditions for that to exist? Why is it that you have so many people, so many refugees coming from these countries, the Central America, North America, because Mexico is North America, Central America, South America, and some of these other countries, refugees from the continent, Africa, refugees from Syria and Lebanon and all these places to the United States. What's wrong in their countries that's forcing them here, right? And if you poll them and you ask them, if the United States had, if your native countries had what the United States has access to, would you stay? And they would say yes. Majority of them would say yes. So it's because of the foreign policies of imperialism that's going on that's driving these people out. And how it directly has a tie to the Black community is this. When you hear about nations such as Iran, North Korea, India's let's just throw India out there, right? When you hear about those nations as it relates to nuclear weapons, what do you hear the United States say? They shouldn't have it. They're irresponsible. I don't know. Like they need to destroy all this. Mind you, United States ain't going to destroy theirs, right? So, so that's the same logic that they have as it relates to gun control in the Black community. We're irresponsible. We shouldn't have it. You look at what happens when it's in your community. Never mind who manufactures, because Black folks don't manufacture guns, and we're not the distributors of it, and we don't wholesale it. So clearly, it's coming into our community by somebody else. We don't have any vessels. We don't have no ships, no planes. We can't bring this stuff in, right? So they have the same logic that they use as it relates to imperialism on a international level that they have here domestically within the United States. And then one other point, as it relates to the Reaganomics and the 1980s and that whole crack era situation, we all know now, that the CIA was fully involved in bringing crack into the communities because of them funding the Contras of Nicaragua, right? How does that affect the black man today or the black woman today? Okay, well, when you have a article, some type of medicine that normally is used in traditional native lands for spiritual practices, and it's extracted and manufactured in such a way that Gary Webb does a great analysis of this in Dark Alliance, and there's a movie called Kill the Messenger that everybody should watch if you haven't, because it kind of chronicles what happened during this, because he was assassinated based on his research that he did with this. But when you have tested this, to note that typically people with high melanin, namely black people, can get more attached or more addicted to these particular properties than other people, then it's okay, cool. So we know we were used to powder cocaine because the rich white folks would do that. Like powder, that's what, if you had some money and you would be doing that in a club or whatever, it was nothing, right? But let's reduce it down to a rock or something that can sell for $2 or whatever, and you can flood the community with that. So now, and look at the pattern of what happened during that time. The 60s, you had the civil rights era. 70s were becoming more militant, right? Because that's when the civil rights era of Martin Luther King merged with the ideology of Black Power and Malcolm X. So then you had the Black Panther Party, right? So this is happening during the 70s. So now you see all these groups busting back against this government and some of these racist policies and these classist policies, So now they're like, okay, well, we need to figure out some way to fund some wars, but also that we can completely interject and intercede in this progression of consciousness with black folks, So there you have vis-a-vis crack. So it's these type of policies that are still in existence. There was I don't know if it was UCLA or USC, but it was an institution on the West in California that literally did a study on syphilis. Now we knew about the syphilis experiment, Tuskegee and all that. We're talking about modernly in the 2010s, where they did a syphilis experiment on Guatemalans, right? Didn't tell them, but just injected them with syphilis. So now, you have these type of, and then also over there, you had where young black kids, and I think it may have been Latino kids as well, that they would use exhaust fumes and pump into their nostrils to see how they test against pollution. Now, when you're sending a contract to a parent that may either be illiterate or didn't graduate or is unable to have what we call in the law informed consent with what they're signing, and you say, "Oh, I'm gonna give you $200. I'm gonna give you $500. All right, sign me up for that. Let me get that. Let me get that. My child only got to breathe some air. Cool." They don't know the depthness of what's going on. This is the system that you're asking black people to be a part of. From the international perspective, because I work on human rights. So the international perspective, as it relates to these other countries, the so-called developed or third world countries, to your day-to-day neighborhoods that are dilapidated, that have poor housing, segregation, redlining. This is a good book as well called The Color of Law that people should read about how the government also was acquiesced to certain laws that continue to advance the segregation within housing. But it's a whole plethora of things as to why. But I think to get back to the question, answer it directly, we have to be political in every aspect in which we do. We need to read. We need to be able to investigate. We need to be able to not just settle for people who are pushed in front of us as leaders that we don't elect, that don't represent us. At the end of the day, that tax bracket is different. Right. Like I said, whether you have a racist analysis of it, and how black folks typically are at the bottom of the totem pole, no matter where you are, because global white supremacy is global, or if it's a classist analysis where the ones that are the wealthiest in the world are running majority of all the land. This is just a few people, and that's the issue with capitalism. Is like it's the few people that control the means of production, as opposed to the rest of society. So you got to be politically educated in everything that you do.
Thank you. That was a really poignant analysis, especially how you related, the international effects of the United States policy and how both parties play a really big role. It's understandable why some of our people are completely disinterested in voting for either party, either of the leading parties. However, we do know that Green Party candidates oftentimes don't have the funding to get as much recognition, and it's hard for a lot of our people to get that buy-in to think that that's a real solution. But going forward, I mean, I do think with the creation of new political parties, we can advance our agendas more. But in the meantime, I think a lot of people do feel like these are their only options because these are the only ones they'll know if they don't do that political research, like you mentioned. So thank
Can
you
I
for all.
say, man? Okay. So what with that point, and I'll make another point. So during the World War One, if I'm not mistaken, I think Germany was the United States was aligned with Germany, or at least the West was aligned with Germany in World War One. But then in World War Two, Germany was the enemy. How did that happen? Media propaganda, right? So I don't buy. Now, granted, you got to look at who owns the media, right? We understand that when you look at I call them the alphabet boys, but ABC, NBC, MSNBC, Fox, all of them, right? Fox may be like a slight exception, but like all of them, they're all reporting on the same stuff, just slightly different. So the same way that they can program you to hate police officers, the same way that they can program you to believe that black folks are just shiftless, lazy, and poor, is the same way that they could educate you to know that that ain't true.
Right.
The same way that they can educate you on some of these parties. And it's like when you get these major donations, like you said, you can't compete with that when they control the advertising and all that stuff with these media outlets. The fact that you have presidential debates that don't even include the two other major parties outside of Republicans and the Democrats, that's an issue. Yeah. Now you can say, okay, well, you don't have money, but do you think that if the masses of people knew about these these topics that they represent, would they vote for them?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So like, I think that we keep saying 4 years later, we need to wait 4 years. We need to wait 4 years. This is a protest vote, all this and that. Personally, I think that we need to just have a party within our own anyway, just as black folks. But you at some point you can't keep kicking the can down the road. Revolution or the Mau Mau, of Kenya, happened with a small sect of people. Revolution happens with a small sect of people. Clearly, you got to buck against the system. Look at the EFF and out in here. Look at the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters of South Africa, right? The ANC control, which is Nelson Mandela's party. The ANC controlled and dominated that party for so many years, right? The EFF came out and said, you know what, y'all getting a little lax, y'all been a little bit too petty bourgeois over there with some of our issues. We're going to run some candidates. They started to run candidates. The first election, they may have had like one seat. Next election, they may have had 8. Next thing you know, they're taking up a large sect of the House.
Right.
It doesn't happen overnight. And in this generation, it's like a microwave generation where you want everything overnight. But like, you got to put in the time to be able to really be committed to what true revolution represents. And that's change. You can't just have two wings of the same bird. If we really want change and progression as a people, for the masses of our people, not just me, who's a lawyer, or somebody else that's on TV, you know what I'm saying? But the masses of our people who are suffering on the day-to-day, then you have to have change in that system.
Definitely.
Let me say one.
Go ahead. Really
I'm sorry. I just want to make one quick point. In World War One, Germany and the United States were adversaries. Germany was actually part of the Central Powers with Austria, Hungary, and Turkey rather. And United States, we started in 1917. We got involved, but we had joined up with France, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan. So, but your point about the
Japan, then you can substitute Germany for Japan.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, but again, because I say media propaganda, because the mass extermination of a certain people also played a big fault in that as well, as why people would program and hate Germany as well. But they're absolutely right. I think one quick point here is I think that we agree on a lot of things. You're saying. I'm right on with you. You know what I'm saying? I think one of the things is that what I've noticed is that black folk, we are afraid to lose the gains that we've already had. And so when it comes to, let's say, supporting a different party and your vote shifting from a particular ticket with a candidate with a specific agenda to address your concerns and needs, and you're shifting it to a party like a third party or someone like that, where those votes go away, empowering the other party that was hoping that you wouldn't show up in the first place. I think that is actually what is kind of unnerving, because it's like, well, if that's in this case, the Republican Party gets in office, they can put an Amy Coney Barrett, they can rush her through for a Supreme Court 6-3 majority. They can put on the federal judiciary 300 or 200 some judges in the federal judiciary that can then, by law, systemically just undo every single gain that you have made over the last half century. And when Black folk look at that, I know that there's that apprehension, because we want that revolution, absolutely. You know what I'm saying? I think it's just that scares, like, yo, are we really trying to go back? Like, my mama grew up in a Jim Crow South. Not my grandma too, but my mother as well. She remembers those times. And I'm like, would you want to go back and even risk to see anything remotely similar to that? And I think that's when it's like that PTSD kicks in. But no, I just want to say I agree with a lot of things you're saying right there.
No, facts. And the issue that I have, and I completely understand exactly what you're talking about, and that is going to be the biggest hang up for us as a people. Because if you think, and I like to just draw analogies to some other places, but just think about the Haitian Revolution, for instance, right? Okay. And we know that in the Haitian Revolution, you know, you had to put your hand on this knife and say, look, yo, like, there's no going, do you want freedom or not? And freedom is going to cost land. You had to burn the land and just kill whoever you had to kill. Now, in this instance, I'm talking about political stuff. So at some point in time, you have to sacrifice in order to get there. There is no progress without sacrifice. And I feel like, and to your point, brother, like, we are so tied into the trinkets of what we already have. I highly doubt that Black folks really just want to sit back and allow the segregation to come back. Well, to allow the Jim Crow South to happen. Like, there will be a lot of destruction and death before that happens. Like, we're more political, I think, now than we were back then, in the sense that, Folasade, if you were told to sit at the back of a bus, would you do it?
No, I would not.
There we go. That's a classic example right there. Like, nobody's going to take that. You know, you're going to fight against. You want to fight against it, and especially if you're looking at these youth today, you know, they're not going to just sit back and allow some stuff to roll. Maybe the older generation would be disenchanted with it. Ours is kind of like the in between type. Like, you know, we're now in our careers, so it's kind of like, do you want to sacrifice that? But these youth right here, the ones that I mentor, ain't going for that. And that's a lot, and that makes up a majority of our people. So I think that we have to come to a point eventually where it's just like, you know what, we got to do what we need to do in order for us to have a true advancement as a collective, not just individually, but as a collective. So that's just going to have to come with sacrifice.
Definitely. And I think I'm really grateful for this dialogue that y'all are having, because I'm seeing a lot of similarities in your viewpoints. And I want us to all three get on the same page, because Kelvin, you've been pretty quiet over there. I want us to just talk about what are the most important things for Black people right now. So if each of you just really quick, just name your top 3 issues that you think are key priorities for Black people, whether that's healthcare, economic access, youth education. What are your top 3? Because we need to find solutions and 4 values that all 4 of us, with our different, each of our 4, because my political perspectives are also different than the 3 of you all. But we need to figure out what exactly brings us together that we can align. So I want to start with Kelvin. What are the top 3 priorities, the top 3 issues affecting Black people that you prioritize?
The top 3 issues affecting Black people, I would say, one of the major ones is that the Black community is highly detached from God. So I would say that's the most dominant thing, is bringing God back into the Black community, and just you know, not being a victim. You know, Black people have been conditioned over the past 60 years to be you know, dependent on welfare, abusive of welfare, and I think a lot of people need to not be played as the victim, which I feel like the mainstream media has convinced a lot of people. A lot with, like I said, with the you know, Black people being murdered by cops, innocent Black people, as they say, for many of the mainstream media cases, which isn't true. But yeah, I just think, I mean, mainly God, bringing God back into the home, putting fathers back into the home.
Okay, so God and family
is
values.
the number 1 issue.
All right, let's hear from Drew. Drew, what are your top 3?
Top 3. Actually, I'm going to start and say environmental justice. Number 1. A lot of things happen in the Black community, and particularly as it relates to the environment in our areas where it contributes to us having a lot of health issues. So exactly. So we're talking about, like, I'm an asthmatic. I'll give you an example. You know what I'm saying? I'm born in West Philly, raised in South Jersey. So, that's one thing. I think environmental issues. I don't think it's tough to spoken on enough, especially if you look at Flint, Michigan. Exactly. That's not exclusive to Flint. We have other areas where there are things just didn't get the publicity. So environmental justice, I really want to put that out there. Also, I'm putting that out there because Kamala was making that same point, which is why. But also, but no, I believe that. The other thing is economic mobility and closing the racial wealth gap. That's another thing. Obviously, the hangups of the New Deal and Jim Crow really disenfranchised Black folk and just left us economically left out of this wealth building experiment known as at least home ownership, which was the major part of it from Roosevelt's New Deal. So that's the thing. And the third thing, obviously, has got to be justice. I mean, we're talking about whether it's a justice system, criminal justice, or revamping the system. If we got to destroy it and build it back up, however you want to get that done. And if you can go in and just reform it, because I'm still under the belief that the criminal justice system in this country, and I'm going to include policing in that specifically, has never been reformed. I've never seen national reform of police in this country. We've seen individual agencies. We have never seen a sweeping national reform of policing. That's why the culture still remains unchanged as it did in the 1800s. And that's just my opinion. So those are my 3 right there. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you for those. And Taalib, what are your top 3?
Yes. So, it's not in any particular order because I wrote out 5, honestly. Okay. But I would say food apartheid. Food apartheid. One of the things that we do, I have an organization called the Tubman House in Baltimore, where we literally are grassroots in the ground doing work. But one of the things that we did within, and this is doing in Gilmore Homes, so where Freddie Gray lived and all these things. So one of the things that we did in that particular community was to build a garden. So we have 3 lots in West Baltimore where we grow fresh food, tomatoes, onions, potatoes, kale, collards. We have chickens and aquaponics. So we have all of this there, smack in the hood, where our brothers and sisters can go across the street. Beautiful thing, I saw an elder actually go and she was cutting her collard greens, and she's like, "You gonna get you some?" I'm like, "No, I'm good," But access to food, because one of the things we don't really think about is when these children go to school and they haven't eaten, or they come from households that are struggling to provide food. How can you ask a child to focus in class when he's starving or when she's starving? That's dang near impossible. So that trickles down to behavioral issues that are classified as disruption and disrespect, which isn't really that. And that's also based on some cultural distinctions as well. So that ties into the next one, which would be education. Education is extremely big in our community, in which we need, and we see the progression of it in a sense that when we were enslaved and we learned the English language, it was literally by hearing it. That's how we were able to learn. It wasn't like we had access to books, So just imagine if we had a structure and institutions within our communities that actually produce these top scientists, doctors, lawyers, whatever you want to call it, the whole full spectrum of what we need in every aspect of your life. We were able to produce that from the schools, and it would be funded to be able to produce it. I think would completely change the trajectory of our community. And then the last one I would say, and it goes kind of what I was saying, is the jobs, economics, and being able to produce jobs. But I also will put healthcare in there too. And the reason being, with jobs, I would say not necessarily providing jobs per se. Like, provide jobs, yes, but I am a true believer in Kuchi Chakalia, which is self-determination. and us being able to build our own stuff and build our own, make our own jobs, employ our own, because these are what the top corporations do. They get assistance from the government in certain aspects, which is tax benefits, and things like that. Also, way back when they had the Homestead Act, when all those people were going, all those Europeans were going west, they did that for free, and they would get free land grants. So if we're talking about really giving away free programs, they've been doing that since they got here. But I think that by us being able to receive certain funds to build our own structures and institutions, you'll get a Tulsa, a Black Wall Street, both in Tulsa and North Carolina and New York. You'll get that. So it's not necessarily, and that was the whole movement of integration anyway, per the leaders' own mouths, is that they wanted the resources, not necessarily, they wanted access to the resources. They saw one community had it, and we wanted access to it. But once again, just like how the immigrants that come here, if you ask them that same question about if their country had those things that America has, would you stay there? If Black folks had the resources that we need to be able to survive and thrive, will we really be begging for jobs?
I think that's a powerful point. And that's one through line I'm seeing with all three of your points of your priority issues is economic access. Kelvin, from your perspective, Black people are too needy. That's your perspective, based on the false beliefs that more Black people are on welfare, which is actually disproven. But Drew, you also mentioned economic access, and so did you, Taalib. Given that we have a new administration in power,
I didn't say that Black people are more on welfare.
You said that. What exactly?
You said based on false belief.
What
no, I said a lot of Black people abuse welfare.
Okay. All right. So we'll we'll just stick to the understanding that we all have a deep concern about economic access for Black people, right? Can we agree on that?
That's right.
So economics and Black people. So with that as something we all align on, how can we hold the new administration accountable to addressing something that we need very desperately in our community? How exactly can we push strategies, regardless of our party affiliation? Like, what can we do in our different political realms to advocate for what's most important for Black people, in our opinions?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll start off real quick. I'll say this. It's the first step is making sure that you are electing people who are willing to be held accountable in the first place. That's number one. And you understand that based on what they've done in their record. And so that's another reason why I'm confident in this Biden-Harris ticket, particularly Kamala Harris, is because she's come from a situation, or at least a background, where she's had to be held accountable for certain things, especially back in 2004 when David Hill, 21-year-old brother, murdered a police officer out there in San Francisco, cold blood with an AK-47. U.S. senators, police rank and file, police unions, everybody was on her head about, seek the death penalty. Kamala Harris looked at everybody in the face. She's the first Black district attorney in the state's 154-year history, and said, no, I'm not going to do it. The death penalty, it disproportionately affects Black and brown people. It is too absolute, and it is not, we don't have enough. She's like, I'm not going to do it. My answer is final. No, she did that. They told her career was about to be over. They said, because that was when you rise to a certain level and they remind you that you're still Negro. And we understand how we all get to certain levels where you may have ascended and you feel a little good about yourself and you get that little reality check. That was hers, and that would shape the rest of her career. But the thing that I think that you have to do is, number one, make sure you have folk who have been tested and been held accountable for decisions as unpopular as some of them may have been. The other thing is make sure you have other people who are going to hold them accountable being elected as well. Right now in Georgia, there is a Senate runoff race between Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff as well. These are two people who will be representing the United States Senate from Georgia. These will be two people instrumental in getting legislation passed that will really ignore or it removes any excuses of saying we couldn't get this done. We can get things like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020 that bans chokeholds, bans no-knock warrants, eliminates qualified immunity for police officers, mandates body cameras. We can get that passed when they're in. The excuses are gone if they're there. So you can get legislation passed for the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Task Force Act that makes sure that it makes sure that the inequities in historic inequities in Black and Brown communities, as far as healthcare is concerned, are addressed when these COVID responses are sent out. So make sure that data on patient outcomes, including the hospitalization, ventilation, mortality that's disaggregated by race and ethnicity, need to get recommendations for the identification of communities that have higher levels of racial and ethnic disparities in COVID-19 infection. We know that COVID-19 disproportionately affects folk that look like people on this panel. And so we want to make sure we're addressing things appropriately, not a one size fits all, to borrow words from Kamala Harris. The other thing we want to make sure that we do to hold people accountable is to stay engaged. And people got, these folk got to understand, J. Cole said, like, them socks be on your heels. Let them know we on your heels. Like, if you out, you're not doing what you're supposed to do, we're going to get you out of there. We're going to get some other folk, because we got a lot of young, hungry minds that are ready to step in and have who are trained and ready to do it. So that's just my suggestion, as opposed to making sure that we get stuff right, remove the excuses, and let's move forward.
Okay, Kelvin, I want to go to you next. What do you think we should do in terms of how we can hold the new administration accountable, especially as someone who didn't support this current administration that's coming in? What do you think you can do? What power do you still have to push the new administration to be accountable to Black people?
When you say the new administration, you're referring to Biden, or you're just referring to whoever wins?
Biden Harris, yes. The current elect.
Well, he's not presidential elect yet. That's just mainstream media projecting that he's presidential elect.
Interesting. So in the event that he becomes the president, how do you use your power as an advocate to hold the new administration accountable to Black people and our interests?
You said, how do I use my power?
Yeah, how do you plan to? I mean, I know you're not going to give up just because we have a new president in power. What do you do differently? What are you going to do to still advocate for the interests of our people?
Well, like I said, my main thing is just helping bring people closer to God, and everything righteous and good falls under that. So once we get, people closer to God, then everything else righteous for our people and just humans in general, will all fall into balance. So, I mean, yeah, that's pretty, that's pretty much it. I mean, the laws of the political movement, the Bible says to obey righteous laws of the land. So it's important to just ensure that we have, righteous laws the best that we can. If we can make all our laws righteous in this country, that would be amazing. But, we've yet to see that day. So, I mean, that would be the goal, regardless of, whether it's, Republican red, Democrat blue, Trump, whatever. My main thing is just what's right and what's righteous for humans.
Okay, and really quick, can you just give us an example of a righteous law that would affect economics for Black people? Give me an example from your perspective.
You said economic. Well, my main one, like I said, being pro-life versus supporting murdering babies in the womb. Murdering babies in the womb is the leading number cause of deaths in the Black community. It's actually on the levels of genocide against Black people. So I think that's a big issue that people need to be re-educated versus thinking that murdering a baby is just abortion and just a oops or a bad decision. But you're actually murdering people. You know what I mean? So I think that needs to be brought into our communities, which is something that used to be looked upon as negative, back in the day in Black communities. But back in the day, Black people were closer to God than they are now. So
interesting perspective of pro-life. And another angle to that point is the number of homicides we have in our community, and I think that directly affects our economic access when we lose family members who were providers, fathers in the homes, to gun violence and other things. But moving on, I'm going to take it over to Taalib. So can you tell us what do you think we should do as Black people to advance our interests under this new administration?
So I'll start off with a couple of books of reference because I think that it's always important for us to get educated in whatever movement or thing in which we do. Cultural Genocide in the Black and African Studies curriculum by Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen is an excellent read. Some in which you may be familiar with, The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Unity and Struggle by one of my favorites, Emil Cabral, revolutionary out of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. And then Black Skin, White Mask by Frantz Fanon. Okay. So one of the things that we need to do, or the first thing I believe, is to just be well educated in whatever aspect in which we go. Fred Hampton once said, Chairman Fred from the Black Panther Party, there is no liberation without education. So if anything were to happen with this administration, both old, new, however you want to frame it on this panel, and someone comes in, are they fully prepared to take over? Are they educated enough to be able to take over, or are they just going to put in place the same policies or similar policies, but just from a different person? And normally we see it in the context of when we want to take over positions as Black folks, and then we go in with the same policies that some occupiers or oppressors have already had. All right. So that's the first thing. Second thing, like I said before, I have an organization called the Tubman House in Baltimore. Also have an organization here, the Movement for Black Power. And then, of course, the typical lawyer organizations, WBA, Young Lawyers Division, and stuff like that I'm a part of. Be a part of an organization because there's, when you have numbers, there's power in it. So to be able to go into these particular spaces, to lobby, to make sure that you're on their heels, to be able to do things within your local, and you keep the current administration and you want to, keep their feet to the fire with that and let them know at any point in time that they step off of that, they're going to see us. But at the same time, keep that same fire for your state board of education, which most people don't even know who's on it, who's controlling the minds of your children, take to task your county representatives, those that are in your state delegation, that state senators and things of that nature, the sheriffs, hold them accountable. It's not just the federal level. And that's what happens. And that's the issue with these elections, is that we're always focused on this federal when you're getting destroyed on a local level. So you're not even going to have a chance to look at the federal. You see? So being educated as to how the system works, how the governmental structure is, and then move accordingly. So everything that you want to see within your own community, figure out what you need to do to make that happen and be a part of it. And then check everybody else who's in power to let them know, look, I have this. That's what the Black Panther Party did. That's why we have the food stamp programs and things now. They created that and put the pressure on the government to do it. And then the government adopted the same thing.
Definitely.
Can I push back on something real quick? I got to just say something because so I'll push back on something Kelvin said earlier, because I appreciate the sentiment of wanting to bring people closer to God, because I do identify as Christian and consider myself saved. One of the things and one of the ways that I would like, and I made a comment about this on Twitter one time before, I said maybe a couple of days ago, saying that if the GOP pushed policies that were actually based on biblical and Christian values, we might get somewhere in this country, because the Bible actually talks about making sure that people have adequate health care, making sure that your foreign policy is actually amiable or actually fair, how to treat the immigrants that come into your nation instead of locking and separating mothers from their babies at the border. The Bible literally tells you to love the immigrant or love the stranger in your land, treat them like the citizen that they're already there. If you are going to be also pro-life, as a matter of fact, if we're going to be talking about being pro-life, we have to be pro-life about everything. As far as if you're going to emphasize the importance of life in this country, what kind of world are you bringing babies into? So that means that you have to make sure they have adequate educational structures set up. You address things like maternal mortality, especially Black maternal mortality, which Kamala Harris has a bill on. That you address things like fibroids, uterine fibroids, which Kamala Harris also has a bill on. That you address things like environmental justice. What kind of environment are you bringing these children to grow up into? Criminal justice, housing. People have adequate housing. The fair wages. The Bible specifically speaks on fair wages. Matter of fact, in Timothy 5:8, 1 Timothy 5:18 tells you that thou shalt not muzzle the ox and treadeth out the corn. The laborer is worth his reward. And the Bible is telling you right now that folk need to be paid adequately. And so one of the things that I love about the word, when it's not used to beat people up or to be some sort of bludgeon against the LGBTQIA community or other communities who may not necessarily identify or be espouse themselves as being quote unquote Christian, is that the Bible actually does give you a blueprint on how to love folks who are different and to make sure that you address things that are ultimately concerning. So I wanted to push back on that. I know sometimes people on the right feel like they have the monopoly on God, and I want to know there's some Holy Ghost filled, fire baptized folk on the left too who look at the Bible and that instruction and say, you know what, there's a lot of good stuff in here about being more equitable and creating an environment for everyone to be have a fair shot. So
Definitely. Thank you all for your input on that, and especially that pushback just there. Yeah, the right does not have a monopoly on God. I think in all of our political parties, spirituality can exist and does exist. But in
and the right
closing,
to choose. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The right to choose. I forgot about that too. The right to choose is in the Bible as well too. I feel like pro-choice. God is pro-choice too. He doesn't really force us to do anything. Matter of fact, life, according to the Bible, actually doesn't even start at conception. It starts at breath. So at birth is when you're aborting a child. Say again.
How is God in support of murdering babies?
You can't murder a baby that's not born. So according to the word of God, life starts at breath. In Genesis chapter 2, it lets you know that when God formed man, he formed him out of the dust of the earth, then breathed into his nostrils, and he became the breath of life, and he became a living being. Life is not constituted by conception. It's actually your breath is when life actually starts. So that's one of the misconceptions. Again, the Bible's been used to bludgeon people for certain things.
So you saying it's okay to kill a baby at 9 months if it's in the womb?
Is it okay to kill? Well, first of all, let's talk about it for a second. Nobody's killing babies at 9 months anyway. That just doesn't happen unless there is the outright horrible emergency to the point.
Democrats for that.
No, they're not. 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 That's called infanticide. It's not. It's not real. It's a QAnon theory. It's not real. So what actually happens is this.
It was actually an act. I think it was New York.
No,
that they were asking for, and there's actual video evidence of people going to the clinic to get abortions for full-term birth.
Nobody does that at 9 months. At full term, you've already picked out a name. You done bought the bassinet. You painted the room a different color. You got clothes. Nobody's killing the baby at that point,
as well as after the baby was born. Did you know about that?
Where they kill babies in the Bible like that too. Out after the baby was born. That's a biblical thing.
All right.
So
but I'll say this. I'll say this. But no one's gonna kill a baby at 9 months unless there's a life situation threatening that woman. That's it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and
unless it's lost in evil.
I'm gonna bring us back to
okay.
to kind of our common ground areas, right? Because we're gonna disagree on pro-choice and pro-life. We're gonna disagree on what exactly that means to us. But in terms of what we can agree on, and I know we're a little bit over time, so I want this to be our final, question, unless you guys have more time. But I want to respect your time. So we all, in each of your priority points, and also in my personal, economic access for Black people is key and critical to our advancement in this country and our ability to thrive and to not be dependent on the government, right? We have these parties and we have these relationships with them, oftentimes going to them at a disadvantage because we don't have the economic power that other communities have. So in terms of our economic access, there's a lot of repair that this country has, that this country owes Black people for 400 years of slavery. We just met the 400th anniversary of the first slave ships brought to this country. Reparations legislation is currently sitting in the House of Representatives. and it's been brought on the books for 31 years now, and it's not being voted on. Which of your political parties would be the one that advances that legislation? Do you all think, really quickly, do you all think reparations are attainable? And if so, which party is most likely to pass that legislation? Which party is most likely to push that and make sure solutions are implemented for reparations for Black people?
Go ahead, Taalib, you got it.
Yeah. Well, to be completely transparent, though, I'm not a spokesperson for the Green Party. I'm just talking about issues that they have put on their platform that I align with. But to be realistic about all the parties, I mean, the Green Party talks about it, and I appreciate it. But reparations, when you think about what it is and what it encompasses, is not just the United States. Because at the time, the United States was still fighting Britain. So you still have aspects of that comes in. It's other countries too. I mean, France had places in the United States. You know what I'm saying? The Spanish. Like, there's so many other countries that would be impacted by that we need to seek reparations from. And I honestly do not expect the United States, Democrats, Republicans, I don't expect the United States to give reparations. I really don't, because then, once again, if you see how up in arms they are when you talk about socialism,
yeah,
and they don't even know what that is, but they just hear that it's like the commies. Like when they are reacting that way about socialism, do you really think that reparations is going to come through to your most oppressed sector? That's something that you would need to. And this is the advocacy part that I do as it relates to genocide and Black people here. But that's something that you need to take to the international level. The United States can't police itself, and I don't honestly see. They may have been, and I give thanks to the Senator Jackson Lee for proposing it, and John Conyers. But like I don't foresee the makeup of this country giving reparations to Black folks.
That's interesting. I mean, I feel like this year in the 2020 primaries, almost every Democratic candidate brought up reparations. They've been pushed to that level, and I feel like racial justice has been at the forefront of 2020. We've seen corporations come out and say Black Lives Matter, and not that is something for us to stand on, right? Because we know corporations are going to flip flop for their profits, right? But this racial justice won this election, right? People out of their house in the middle of a pandemic to protest that have never done it before. People who haven't protested since the 60s, the Gen Z, children who've never had to protest have come out and stood up for racial justice. I think differently on that. I think we do have an opportunity to push for reparations. But I want to hear from Kelvin, and then over to Drew about reparations. Kelvin, do you even think reparations are attainable?
I think they're attainable. I mean, I think the left would try to figure out some way to do it, but I don't think it's needed. I think it's completely foolish that a lot of Black people today are, basically begging for reparations to get paid for something, Black people, centuries ago had to suffer from, and no Black person today in America has had to suffer from any of that. In fact, Black people in America, we have the greatest opportunity in the world born in this country. So I think, a lot of Black people need to understand and respect the great country that we've been born in. The fact that we're all on this video chat right now, just chilling, having this conversation is an extreme blessing that you can't get in many other countries. And yeah, like I said, to track reparations is just really silly at this point because we're all mixed. How do you know who's Black? How do you distribute reparations? Everybody wasn't even slave owners back in the day. There were Black slave owners and there were white slave owners in this country. So how do you determine who gets reparations? It's just really silly when you look at it. The issue is, we lack a lot of moral character in the Black community because we're so detached from God in the Black community. So whether you get reparations or money or not, it's not going to change the overall Black community, such as all the hoods across America. You know, what's going to change that is God. And first you have to have God in those communities for them to even be able to make that change. But just giving them money, I mean, you're just going to blow that the same way everybody blew that $1,200 check. You know, you can give a whole bunch of Black people $100,000 each, and if your mind ain't right, you still gonna blow it. So, and then they still gonna be angry. You know, there's a lot of anger in the Black community because they don't know God. You know, so it's really important to get to know yourself. Really get to know yourself. Look at your life and go and face your parents and go and forgive, so that God can forgive you and reveal to you the truth, and you know, bring you back into God's home. But you know, forgiveness is key, so that's very important.
Okay, and I want to hear from Drew before we wrap up.
Yeah, no cap. So I say that reparations is attainable. Reparations are attainable. I think that one of the things we have to do is understand what reparations would be for. Understand, obviously, you know, for 246 years of slavery, but also there was 100 years of state-sanctioned terror after that as well. That was also in place. That is not that long ago. That was literally yesterday. Again, I have a mother. My own mom was privy to that. And so one of the things we have to do is understand what we're actually covering. The other thing about that is you have to analyze, well, like HR 40 does, how to actually go about doing that. Is it cash payments? Is it more structural, systemic changes and implementations of policies that disproportionately or overwhelmingly actually benefit Black people in this country? For instance, I'm of the idea that, you know, if reparations is just going to be cash payments and that's it, it's undoing everything, because people talk about economic base, but if you don't get rid of these systemic issues that we have, these systems that are working, these institutions that work against you, you just going to be facing the same oppression in a flyer outfit. You dig what I'm saying? So if you pull me over, if the police profile me, you know what I'm saying, I'm gonna be wearing Gucci, I'm be dripping, but it's the same situation.
What instances are working against us, you said?
Well, we can talk about the institution. Oh yeah, no, we can talk, absolutely, no. We can talk about as it pertains, or as it pertains to law enforcement, like the example that I just gave you, as far as racial profiling, people who are people in power who are looking for things like stop and frisk, the criminalization of Black bodies. We look into environmental situations where, okay, you have you're getting a steady flow of extra money going into you, but you're still in a quote unquote food desert, and you're thinking, well, maybe they'll just move out. But you understand, if the systems are in place, there's never been a time where economics has been able to remove racism, as far as anti-Black racism, completely from the spectrum. Because you can make all the money you want, you still are subjected to the same oppression. It does not matter what your bank account looks like. I saw the president for the Toronto Raptors, matter of fact, he went on the court, man, making about $15 million, immaculately tailored suit, fantastic. Watch was ridiculous. Haircut, fresh fade, all that. The entire getup was probably was worth more than the cop that harassed him makes in probably 3 months. You do what I'm saying? So it's that. But the other thing I want to mention is that I'm of the belief that it has to be structural. You got to be putting things in place to where you are eliminating student loans for certain folks. You are creating policy that will overwhelmingly affect us. So you're talking about putting healthcare policy in there that makes sure that African Americans are overwhelmingly covered, such as like expanding the ACA and then introducing a public option. If you are going to make sure that education, so households that make less than $125,000, that they're able to go to college for free, that you're able to eliminate the student debt for people who are making less, eliminate $10,000 of the student debt for people who are making less than $125,000 or $50,000, or $50,000 student being eliminated, things like that. So those are some of the examples that you actually see.
Have to pay for other people's school.
I'll tell you why, because we already do. Matter of fact, reparations is a common theme in America. As a matter of fact, after the slave owners lost slaves, the slave owners received reparations for those actual slaves. So we do all the time. We give reparations for a number of different institutions in this country. So again, I'm not of the mindset that everybody should get a check. If anybody's gonna get cash payments, in my opinion, it should be the elders, the people who went through Jim Crow, and just take care of my mama first. Give me, able-bodied young man, policy that I can build on, that helps me with home ownership, that helps me build wealth in that regard. Because I got the time left in my life to benefit from that. But I feel like the older folks should get priority when it comes to cash. That's my personal opinion on it. So, but yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's a really important component of this current legislation, HR 40, is determining who, what, where, when, and how reparations will even happen. And that's all the legislation is for, is to determine and to figure out proposals for what could happen. So, I think in each of your lanes and each of your political perspectives, you still have power, regardless of who's elected president. For some of us who aren't decided that we have a new president yet, regardless of who's in power, we have our individual power to impact policy and to impact things that happen in our community. So I want to thank you all for being a part of today's conversation. I thank you so much for your time and your energy and your openness and willingness to share your perspectives. I hope you all, were fed and nourished by each other's perspectives and encouraged to keep advocating and fighting for our people. So I thank you all. And if you have any final thoughts, here's your time.
Thank you for the platform once again.
Right.
And oh, my bad. Yeah, thank you for the platform again. You brothers, I appreciate the build. You know what I'm saying? Like, no matter what our perspective, political ideologies and philosophies are, we do have the same objective and goal for our people. You know what I'm saying? And that's what we're advocating for, just in a different methodology and different way. So long as we can unite and come together based on that, I'm willing to build with whoever.
So hey, look, echo the same sentiments, and look, it's we have a very promising administration that'll be coming in. So I'm looking very hopeful, especially with someone who comes from the situation and perspective that I'm familiar with, that Folasade is familiar with, as far as especially the HBCU perspective, and seeing the full a broad spectrum of Blackness and how our different issues are exemplified. And so I'm feeling very, very encouraged just from what I know. Oh yeah, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, by the way. Yeah, thank you for having me.
And I just say, like I said, get to know yourself, face your parents, your mother, your dad, like go, sit down, talk to them one-on-one, and just let them know that you forgive them if you need to. I would assume that y'all might need to, so I'm just throwing it out there. But forgiveness is key. Only when you forgive will God forgive you and reveal himself to you. So I love y'all. I love all of y'all. And, God bless.
God bless. I appreciate you all. Thank you. I want to thank you all for being a part of today's Unscripted Conversation. I hope you are able to connect, acknowledge, and challenge each other's belief systems in order to better serve our community. Please continue to have these conversations with your family, in your communities, and in your networks. And be sure to tune in for the next episode of Unscripted Conversations. Bye.